While they're often looked at as just a fringe group of political whack jobs who think that the road to Stalinism is paved with driver's licenses, the truth is their ideology is much more influential and dangerous than you probably realize.
Ew, I think I stepped in shit. Hey everyone. So a common observation I and many others have made in debate over the internet is a cognitive bias where retards mistakenly believe that they're more intelligent than they actually are. Then when challenged over contradictions in their ideas, or when their ideas get absolutely fucking stomped on, they put on this condescending mask of illusory superiority and try and talk down to you as if you didn't just give them the intellectual equivalent of a pimp slap, typically to try and project their own ego. Well, that's basically the video we're looking at today in a nutshell.
Libertarianism, America's favorite political sideshow.
Nothing like a journalist working on behalf of the state-funded media outlet of a Middle Eastern feudal dictatorship governed under a totalitarian theocratic code from the 6th century to tell people how bad libertarianism is. I'm sure that the literal slaves who created the platform from which you're now bashing the idea of self-ownership from are happy to hear it.
While they're often looked at as just a fringe group of political whack jobs who think that the road to Stalinism is paved with driver's licenses,
another thing you'll notice is that throughout the video he never actually explains what libertarianism is or what libertarians believe. He just throws out a bunch of toothless insults and stereotypes, then calls it a radical fringe idea. You wanna know what libertarians actually believe in? Don't hurt anyone else. That's actually it. Ooh, such a radical fringe ideology. Well, I mean, if we're talking about the current society, then perhaps it is, in the sense that it's radically different than what we have. Perhaps this is a Freudian slip and he's unwittingly conceding the point of libertarianism.
The truth is their ideology is much more influential and dangerous than you probably realize.
Indeed, we're going to abolish the state so that everyone can associate and act in any manner which they like so long as they aren't violating anyone else's rights. That's very dangerous to the Qatari monarchy, I'm sure. Matt Lieb, what are you doing? Are you trying to be that reactionary, agenda-driven faux journalist that everyone looks back at in 50 years as an example of how political propaganda in the past used to look? Kind of like how people right now look back at that one documentary about homosexuality from the 50s?
Jimmy knew he shouldn't be interested, but, well, he was curious. What Jimmy didn't know was that Ralph was sick. A sickness that was not visible like smallpox, but no less dangerous and contagious, a sickness of the mind. You see, Ralph was a homosexual.
The truth is their ideology is much more influential and dangerous than you probably realize.
Those stupid people in the 2010s with their irrational desire for oppression from a criminal gang that doesn't even try to justify itself.
Because libertarianism isn't so much a political philosophy as it is a religious ideology where the Lord and Savior is pure, unadulterated capitalism.
The irony of someone who ascribes supernatural powers to another group of people, i.e. thinking that through the state, government employees can delegate rights to themselves that other people don't have, calling someone else who doesn't believe this religious is fucking astounding. In fact, if you understood what you were talking about, or at the very fucking least made the attempt to discuss ideas from an intellectually honest framework, you'd realize that the inherent inconsistency of government, whether it's violating your right to free association by forcing you to associate with it, or arbitrarily declaring things which aren't unethical, like gun ownership to be a crime, then using violent coercion to stop you from doing the actions they've declared to be criminal without explanation, is the reason libertarians object to the state. and what you call unfettered capitalism is really just the right to free association and self-ownership, which the state inherently violates. So yes, we are opposed to a group which violently imposes its will onto us for no reason other than they said so, so it's justified.
Invisible hand of the free market, take the wheel.
Oh my god. First of all, Adam Smith wasn't even a libertarian. He was an economist from the classical school of economics, which advocates for a central bank, rejects marginalism, and believed that government spending could stimulate the economy. Basically, classical economists were just the mercantilists that rejected the notion that the state was the ultimate producer of wealth. Secondly, the invisible hand is not an argument or an economic model. It's a metaphor that Smith used to describe unintended social benefits derived from self-interested actions. Here's some advice. If you're gonna at least try to refute laissez-faire economics, at least recognize that laissez-faire economists advocate for something called Say's law, not the invisible hand. Otherwise, you're just gonna look like a fucking retard. Yep, your eyes are not deceiving you. We're not even past the intro yet. And so far, you've made yourself look like an even bigger ignoramus than my usual subjects.
American libertarianism is the idea that government is evil and needs to be dismantled.
There we go. I fixed that for you since there's no such thing as a libertarian party. Also, I turned your mouth sideways and replaced your head with it, because now you look like a giant vagina.
Libertarians don't see society as a collective, they instead champion radical individualism.
Oh my god, that's even worse than your last characterization of libertarianism, because now you're implying that society is a collective as if that's just sort of general knowledge, which it's self-evidently not. Don't believe me? Well then ask yourself the last time you were able to sync up to the society-wide hive mind. The fact that people have any individuality whatsoever proves that society is not a fucking collective. And radical individualism, basically just code word for anyone who's not a Marxist quasi-intellectual like me. Yes, libertarians reject collectivism and realize individualism to be legitimate. Individualism is simply the principle of people's rights having priority over any group, whereas collectivism is the opposite.
That notion of children, your kid is yours and totally your responsibility. We haven't had a very collective notion of these are our children. So part of it is we have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families and recognize that kids belong to whole communities.
So an individualist would reject the notion that double standards on ethics can be justified, or crimes could be justified in the name of the group's interest, as collectivists like yourself literally believe that individuals' lives belong to the group rather than each person having their own rights and self-ownership and therefore being entitled to their life, since you can't justify murdering them.
They see the free market as a force for absolute good and government as solely a corrupting force.
You're conflating two completely different things, libertarians and laissez-faire economists. While libertarians believe in laissez-faire economics, the reason is exclusive to one thing, that being their rejection to state authority. Whereas laissez-faire economists are merely making observations about the economy and proposing economic thesis. Granted that both of these groups can and often do overlap, you don't have to be a libertarian to accept laissez-faire economics as legitimate. However, you do have to reject coercion in order to be a libertarian. It's easy to confuse the two groups since they make the same arguments though, so I will give you that. And this is an important distinction to make because libertarianism is not an economic philosophy. However, when you state this as if libertarians only reject the state because they view it as being harmful for the economy, you are misrepresenting what libertarians actually advocate for. A libertarian society, by definition, would not have a grounded, structured economic model. So, for example, if you were a communist and you wanted to start a commune with your friends voluntarily, you could do this. Libertarianism only advocates for free association and that coercion is not allowed. That's not to say that there wouldn't be a market or an organized society, only that there aren't any state-enforced economic policies.
One of the primary ways they express these beliefs is by shrieking about taxes constantly.
That's because taxation is not only fundamentally required in order for a state to exist, but it encompasses every single problem with the state on one issue that everyone can relate to. The state steals from us, which both shows its criminality, but also that it operates by claiming to have rights which people themselves don't have, which is a blatant inconsistency, demonstrating that the state operates on nothing but an artificial claim to authority, which it cannot possibly and doesn't even try to make, and that the state is an inherently criminal entity which violates our rights in order to sustain itself. If anything, most libertarians don't dig deep enough into the logical conclusions of taxation. Taxation is arguably even worse than regular theft, because say you have two scenarios. A mugger mugs a person for $50, or the mugger gets a politician to redistribute $50 from the victim to the mugger. Well, now in the second scenario, the victim is effectively a forced laborer for the mugger because the government forces the victim into labor to provide what the government deemed to be an entitlement to the mugger, whereas in the first scenario it was just a one-time occurrence. So really, taxation isn't just theft, it's slavery.
Yup, taxes are just like robbery, except instead of taking your television away, they take your trash away. Which is nice.
Nope, sorry, that's a red herring. Whether or not you get anything in return is not relevant to the question. If you were to get mugged and $100 was stolen from you, then the mugger the next day hands you a moldy sandwich, is that still theft? Yeah, of course. Why? Because the mugger took your property without your consent with the intent of depriving you of it. So yes, sorry statists, taxation is theft no matter what fallacies you throw at us. You cannot escape this conclusion.
It's nice. Sure, paying taxes doesn't feel good, but once you factor in all the bridges and schools and firefighters and roads and whatnot, it does seem like kind of a fair trade.
All of those services can be provided voluntarily and are better when provided voluntarily because state subsidizing decreases marginal utility and incentive to actually provide services, since nothing will happen to these companies if they displease the consumers, whereas if a market entity displeases consumers, they lose everything because people will just go to a different producer, giving them incentive to actually try and do a good job. So when I specified that the state was giving you a moldy sandwich in my previous analogy, there was a reason as to why I specified that the sandwich was moldy. So I don't know about you, but being what amounts to nothing more than a serf to an unjustifiable group of criminals in exchange for moldy sandwiches doesn't sound like a very good deal for me. And if you like that arrangement so much, then again, why can't you just fuck off and start a voluntary commune? Why do I have to be involved?
But don't you dare mention roads to libertarians.
Ah, the old who will build the roads. Roads, roads, roads. Where we're going, we don't need roads.
No, seriously, we need roads.
Wow, you slimy little weasel. Now you're just resorting to quote mining and taking people out of context to strawman their arguments in the most dishonest of fashion. 'Cause that's not even close to the libertarian answer for that question. In fact, I just gave you the answer a second ago. And to illustrate my point, ever notice how private parking lots are so smooth and you never see any cracks or uneven spots in them, while public roads in many places are so bad, have so many potholes you can't even drive down them with some cars? Yeah, there's a reason for that. So now we know that even you don't believe this bullshit because you have to lie about it like a little piece of shit. So let's just skip to the important points because I'm almost done.
The burning bush said unto Moses, "Don't worry about paying taxes, my dude, for the invisible hand of the free market will take care of everything." And yea, the bush soon became a forest fire and burned down Moses' village because there were no taxes and thus no firefighters.
Only if you ignore the fact that nearly 70% of all firefighters as is are volunteers, that once again, firefighting is a service which can be provided voluntarily since there's a demand for it, and it would be more efficient if it was provided voluntarily.
There's a kind of charming, faith-based optimism when it comes to the way that libertarians view private enterprise and human nature. Scary and delusional, but charming. Just listen to Libertarian candidate John McAfee's reasoning when explaining why we don't need government-funded social programs because we can rely on each other.
Voluntary social spending is higher in societies with freer markets, more people have more money, and there's less artificial scarcity and economic problems created by the government bogging down the market. So in other words, people do look out for others more so in free markets, and more people do have more money to spend. Even if this wasn't the case, however, as I've pointed out several times in the past, why universal health care can't ever work and is inherently doomed to fail, I'll link that video in the description. Also, you're not entitled to a commodity as a right, since to claim such an entitlement claims that you have the right to labor required to create it, implying a right to slave labor. So what's your counter-argument? Or let me guess, you don't have one and are just appealing to improbability. If so, that's double sad, because a free market system is objectively better on every metric.
Aww. Speaking of neighbors, true story, John McAfee was wanted by police in Belize in connection to the murder of his neighbor, so... he's sweet.
Nope, you're just gonna launch character assassinations and try and dodge his argument, huh? I have taken shits that have more intellectual substance than you. If the feudal monarchs of the Qatari government are paying you more than peanuts, then they're getting ripped off, because I would actually be willing to wager that a monkey in a suit could do a better job arguing than you.
The idea that we don't need laws because people will do the right thing anyway, or that we don't need taxes because people will fund important things anyway, or the idea that we don't need regulations because companies will be ethical anyway, none of that is born out of any statistics, historical precedent, or any other evidence of any kind.
Points 1 and 3 are both straw man arguments. No libertarian has ever argued that without laws, people will just do the right thing. Libertarians merely argue that the state is an unjustified entity and that political authority cannot exist. Instead, because logic is objective, ethics are also objective, and therefore it's possible to derive objective conclusions on what is ethical without an arbiter defining it. In fact, if an arbiter did have to define what society's rights were, then society wouldn't have any rights, since by definition they would be arbitrary. And if rights are entirely arbitrary, then rights don't exist in that society, since what is and isn't right can be changed at any time, and there's no distinction between an unethical and an ethical behavior being defined as a right. And I assume that's why you need to resort to such misrepresentation, because rights being derived from government authority is a self-contradicting paradox, and you have no argument against natural law. And neither libertarians nor laissez-faire economists argue that regulation shouldn't exist or that market entities would just do the right thing. There is no profit in behaving unethically, since if a producer in a free market were to treat their workers terribly and artificially undercut their pay or create terribly made commodities all to save some money, people wouldn't work for that company or buy products from them, because people don't want to work in terrible conditions for little pay, nor do they want to buy a product that doesn't work. They would just go to a competitor offering better prices, better quality labor, and better quality products, and therefore in a competitive market, producers are directly incentivized to innovate and produce better quality products and to pay their workers well with better benefits. In other words, the market regulates itself. And yes, people will voluntarily negotiate to provide services for themselves the government currently provides today, and I can't even believe anyone actually argues against this. Any product which has demand for it will be on the market or will be actively traded. And if it's a fundamental service which people need, there will inherently be a demand for it, meaning that there will always be active trading for it. Using this reasoning, supermarkets or fast food places shouldn't exist because nowhere in U.S. federal law does it say that people are entitled to food as a right. In fact, in countries where the food is provided by the state as an entitlement, the population starves. And to say that there aren't any examples of this in the real world is completely fucking delusional. In the description, I will link a compilation of data charts put together demonstrating that societies with freer markets have objectively better economies on every metric, and examples of stateless societies in the past which did better than their state counterparts.
It's the same kind of faith-based thinking as Santa is real or Ted Cruz is human.
Or that the state has supernatural powers that no one else has. Oh wait, that's what you believe.
Not just someone wearing a Batboy mask that got melted in a microwave.
Wait, Batboy, don't you mean Robin? Can you people just stop trying to make jokes, please? Because you're not fucking good at it.
While libertarians might be anti-driver's license, anti-Medicare, and anti-public roads, the flip side of being so rigidly anti-government is that they also end up being anti-NSA, anti-interventionist, and anti-drug laws, which appeals to people on the other side of the political spectrum. In fact, the common elevator pitch for libertarianism is that while fiscally conservative, they're also socially liberal.
No one describes themselves that way except for Libertarian Party quote-unquote libertarians. Also notice how he's attempted to define libertarianism and then step back and choose a different misrepresentation like 5 times now. Even if your arguments were good, which, oh fucking good lord, they are not, this would still be a horrible video because your presentation fucking sucks. Like, it's to the point where even your straw man arguments are incoherent. Just think about that for a moment. How much of an absolute fucking failure do you have to be in order to not be able to deconstruct misrepresentations of your opponent's arguments which you created that were deliberately designed and crafted in a way that made them easier for you to respond to?
I believe in a world where gay married couples can protect their marijuana fields with fully automatic machine guns, baby. Oh, yeah.
Yay! Wait, hold on. Why do we need machine guns if weed is legal?
This is hands down the dumbest fucking question I've ever heard. Why do you need guns if weed is legal? Maybe someone wants to harm their family, or maybe someone's trying to rob them. Also, I find it hilarious that you think government rulings will stop all crime, then you call the libertarians delusional religious fanatics. Do you even dress yourself? I bet you don't even dress yourself.
Oh, it's the world's more dangerous? Libertarian world's more dangerous. It's more dangerous.
Oh, look at that. When gun ownership goes up, homicide goes down. Almost like when more people have more guns, potential criminals associate higher risk with crime, and less people are willing to risk committing crimes. And of course we have Kennesaw, Georgia, where all citizens are legally required to own a gun, and violent crime is virtually non-existent.
But the socially liberal side of libertarianism is less about a belief in civil rights being law, and more that civil rights are less important than property rights.
No, it's the realization that they're the same. There's no situation where you can violate someone else's rights with your own rights, and the fact that you think you not only can, but that you should, only proves our point that statism is fucking insane.
Listen to libertarian darling Senator Rand Paul explain his thoughts on the 1964 Civil Rights Act.
I like the Civil Rights Act in the sense that it ended discrimination in all public domains, and I'm all in favor of that.
But
you had to ask me the but. I don't like the idea of telling private business owners. I abhor racism. I think it's a bad business decision to ever exclude anybody from your restaurant. But at the same time, I do believe in private ownership.
Wow.
Wow. Not having the right to demand labor from other people because of your skin color. So terrible. Isn't it the liberal idea that everyone should have equal rights? Demanding forced association because of your skin color or any other identity you happen to have sort of defeats the purpose, then.
I abhor racism, but that should definitely be the new libertarian slogan.
Holy fuck, I thought this retarded argument died in 2014. Saying that you aren't racist and explaining why is not proof of racism, nor does it imply racist beliefs. That's the logical fallacy known as a Kafka trap. It's a circular, unfalsifiable argument where you may as well just be shrieking, "I'm right, I swear," until the other person stops responding.
And this isn't just Rand Paul. Libertarians often deflect on questions of civil rights.
Mr. McAfee, would you have voted in favor of the 1964 Civil Rights Act had you been in the Senate?
Alright, I forgot that retarded progressives are incapable of realizing that people other than white people can be racist, so I guess I'll try and describe this in a way that he can understand. Because of the Civil Rights Act, a white customer can now demand association from a black business owner, and the black business owner would be forced to serve the white customer, or the white customer can file a lawsuit against the black business owner and bankrupt him. I have a sinking suspicion that this explanation isn't going to cut it for the progressive crowd, so I guess I'll just be as blunt as I can. Slavery is forced labor, and the Civil Rights Act forces private actors in the market to associate with people based on their skin color. So the Civil Rights Act is effectively the actual institutionalizing of identity-based slavery. And even though it's called the Civil Rights Act, it's not a promotion of civil rights. In fact, it only exacerbates the problems that were going on in the South because of Jim Crow laws. What a rather pathetic attempt to try and smear all of your opponents as racist because you're simply incapable of arguing against any of their points.
So it's clear that libertarianism represents the furthest right-wing fringe of economic conservatism.
Nope. Libertarianism is not an economic philosophy, and economic conservatives subscribe mostly to neoclassical economics and support organizations like the IMF, while libertarians only want free association and reject government programs to pump subsidies into the market. I have a whole video going into detail on the topic if any of you are interested.
But no, these people are fine because they don't worship Kim Jong-un, they worship Kim Jong-un Rand. Kim Jong-un Rand. They worship Ayn Rand.
Ah! I just cringed so hard that my spine snapped! Someone call a doctor!
The joke is good. It's a good pun.
It is so bad that when I first heard it, I cringed so hard that my body actually curled up a little. No joke.
So how did such a fringe political ideology gain so much ground in America?
Because it's based on the consistent application of a principle which everyone fundamentally believes in, that you don't have rights that others don't have, and that initiating violence against others is wrong. And natural law literally can't be rejected, as the inherent objectivity of logic implies the objectivity of ethics. The only disagreement that can rationally occur is of what ethics you can derive from natural law. So, with the fact that everyone can relate to libertarianism and the insanely high amount of explanatory power libertarian ethics carry, it's more likely that there are even more libertarians than just 11% of the population. However, to be fair, I'd be willing to bet that most of those people are statists like Steven Crowder or Rand Paul who think that minarchism can be libertarian. Literally just debunked that in my last video, by the way.
Well, not shockingly, it turns out that libertarianism is very popular with the very rich, specifically among the political donor class.
Oh, fuck you. No, it's not. The overwhelming majority of big corporations and lobbyists lobby in favor of increasing regulation and stimulus or other practices which libertarians are all staunchly opposed to. Big corporations hate the free market because in a free market they actually would have to compete, which in turn would mean that they have to work harder to earn the profit that they do. Where in a heavily regulated market, big corporations don't have to compete because competitors are kept out of the market, either directly by force from the state or by the artificially increased costs created by regulations imposed onto them by the state. But you don't even need to go that far to debunk this shallow, petty attempt to invoke class politics. If libertarianism was so popular among lobbyists, how come libertarianism has a very small influence in mainstream politics, if any? Progressives in the media like to say, follow the money. But if you actually do, you'll find that they themselves are nothing but a bunch of corporatist shills. Alright, well, I'm stopping here since after this point nothing new is contributed and we've gone on a half hour. Other than just pointing at some self-made rich people and trying to pathetically confirm his own conclusion, which contradicts his conclusion because they don't lobby for libertarianism and it sort of contradicts the idea of class politics to have self-made rich people. But in conclusion, this was one of the most pathetic and blatant propaganda pieces I've ever responded to, with little to no shame in how dishonest and manipulative it is. It didn't even make the difference between libertarianism in party and philosophy, for God's sakes. And these people think they're making an actual argument. That's the sad part. Never before have I stepped in shit, and the shit I stepped in pissed me off so much that I wanted to stomp on it again just to inflict pain.